Good morning and welcome to the Rady Executive Breakfast Series. My name is Monica Sellas, Director of Development at the Rady School of Management at UC San Diego. The Rady Breakfast Series started years ago to connect our Rady community with high-level executives to explore exciting and engaging topics. Today is no exception, as we have a panel of 3 of the most prominent alumni from our first class at Rady, moderated by one of the region's most experienced biotech CEO and board member. Before we continue with our program, we want to give you our most heartfelt thanks to Union Bank for sponsoring this event. Union Bank has been a strong partner of the Rady School of Management since its inception, and we will not be more grateful. As you'll notice, this event is held in a Zoom webinar format. There will be a time in the end to ask questions. Please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. You will also notice a closed captioning option. That one can turn on and off with a click of a button. If you cannot see the closed captioning button, go to the more with the 3 dots and you can hide or turn on your subtitles as needed. With no further ado, it's now my pleasure to introduce our fearless leader, Dean Lisa Ordóñez.
Thank you, Monique, and good morning to all. I am so happy to be here and see you, as it were. Can't wait until we can have this breakfast series in person as it usually is. It is a pleasure for us to host this panel as it reminds us of why Rady was founded, the need to support talented scientists in this robust region and bring their ideas from lab to market, to train scientists to be able to manage great organizations and become leaders. San Diego is the 3rd largest biotech hub in the world, and we are proud to be an anchor in the innovation ecosystem here in California, as you will see from our panel of alumni today. I'd like to note how important alumni engagement is for us. So a heartfelt thank you to all our alumni panelists today. We are fortunate to have alumni participation from our very first graduating class. This event marks the start of their 15-year reunion celebration this year. Special thanks to Mike Gray, who will be our moderator today. Mike has founded several biotechnology companies. He is currently chairman or executive chairman of, and it's a long list, Mirum Pharmaceuticals, Amplyx Pharmaceuticals, Reneo Pharmaceuticals, Spruce Biosciences, and Plexum Inc. He also serves as a venture partner at Papa's Capital. Mike has 45 years of experience in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industries and has held senior positions at a number of companies. We are fortunate to call Mike our friend at the Rady School and a supporter of our talent. In fact, each of the alumni panelists have been given great opportunities to collaborate and work with Mike. Thank you, Mike, for being here, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Dean Ordóñez, and good morning, everybody. So it's my real pleasure to have worked with Ciara and Sean and Niall on multiple occasions, and we still look to find opportunities to do that together. So they are true leaders in the biotech community, entrepreneurs, investors, and have made a tremendous contribution to the community. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves and just say a little bit about what they do, and I'll start with Ciara.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everybody. Ciara Kennedy, Flexo6, as are Niall and Sean. I'm currently president and CEO of Amplyx Pharmaceuticals, a company that is focused on developing truly innovative medicines for patients with immune-compromised conditions that go on to face life-threatening infections. The mortality associated with these infections is scary. And I also have the pleasure of serving on the board of both private and public companies based here in San Diego, and have been working with Niall and Mike for the last decade or so, really doing important things for patients, and that's what lights my fire.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Mike. Great to see everybody, and really fun to be back with so many friends and colleagues today, and reminiscing back to those days of Rady. It was a transformative experience for, I think it's fair to say, all of us, being the first class in the school. amazing to see how far the school has come. So I'm President, CEO, and Chairman of CytomX Therapeutics. We are a South San Francisco-based oncology-focused biotech company. We were founded in 2008. I joined in 2011, actually right at the end of 2010, in fact, and I've been running the company for about 9 years. We took the company public in 2015, and we focus on a new class of oncology therapeutics based on therapeutic antibodies. Our vision statement for our company is transforming lives with safer, more effective therapies. So we're trying to bring a new class of more targeted biologic agents to cancer patients. And what gets us up every day to go to work, wherever we're working these days, whether it's our lab people who continue to work in the lab behind me, or those of us who are still working at home, it's really to make a big difference, make the biggest difference we can for cancer patients, because although we have seen many advances over the last couple of decades, there's still so much more work to do, particularly in the late lines of cancer treatment. So that's our passion, and we've raised a lot of money for our company over the years. So I'm delighted to be on this panel to share some of those experiences and some of the ups and the downs in the market, and maybe thinking about where this might all go in the future. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Niall.
Good morning, everyone. Niall ODonnell, Managing Director at RiverVest Venture Partners based here in San Diego. Actually, our offices are up in North Torrey Pines, just around the corner from the Rady School. Been with RiverVest 15 years, and I think it's the Rady MBA from 2004 to 2006 that Ciara, Sean, and myself did. At least for me, was a massive springboard in my career. One last day of April 2006, I was happily pipetting at the bench at Johnson & Johnson Pharmaceuticals, where I was a research scientist. And a week later, I was a venture capitalist investing in companies. And that was largely driven by my experiences at Rady. At RiverVest, we are investing out of our 5th fund. A good chunk of those dollars go into the San Diego area, about 40%. And our mission statement, although it's taken a little bit of refining over the years, is to focus on patients and entrepreneurs. And if we do that and do that well, treating patients with high unmet medical needs, moving into therapeutic white spaces, giving the cash and empowering the entrepreneurs, then our investors, as a happy consequence of taking care of those first two, will do well. And so that's been our focus. And it's been a great pleasure to work with Mike and Ciara. And I've learned from Sean during the MBA as well.
So thanks. So the title of the panel is The Future of Investing in Biotech and Innovation After COVID-19. We're going to talk about how COVID has impacted our business. What have we learned? What changes will survive? What new needs and opportunities have arisen? And how do we see things impacting biotech going forward? Clearly, COVID-19 has had a dramatic impact on many lives. I think as probably hear from the panelists that in biotech, we're somewhat privileged in that much of what we do, we've been able to carry on doing, albeit in different ways. And it's also been a tremendous opportunity for this, for this industry. We've seen a tremendous response from the biopharmaceutical industry with innovative vaccines and treatments for coronavirus developed in record time and now being widely administered, not as widely administered as many of us would like, but hope that improves as we roll into spring here. And interestingly, this had a dramatic impact on the pharma industry and how it is viewed. A recent Harris poll showed 62% of Americans had a favorable view of the industry compared to only 32% a year ago. So as we think about the biotech component of this, I really think about sort of 3 critical components to a biotech company or venture. There's the science, the product, the platform, whatever it is that we're doing. There's financing, which is necessary to enable us to do these things. But most important of all are the people and how we put together teams and find the appropriate talent. I'm going to start with financing as the first topic here. As we all recall, there was a tremendous pullback in the market in March as the extent of this pandemic became evident. But almost as remarkably, it recovered very rapidly, notwithstanding what how this was impacting lives. We saw that particularly in biotech. So biotech had one of its most successful fundraising years ever last year. There were 70 biotech IPOs in 2020 compared with 41 in 2019. The median pre-money was over 500 million, median deal size over 200 million, and 86% of those 71 IPOs were above issue price at the end of last year. So it's just tremendous reaction from the investing public and professionals to the opportunity presented by innovation in biotechnology. I've been involved in 2 IPOs in the last 2 years, which were markedly different in their format. 2019, we took Mirum Pharmaceuticals public with the old-fashioned 10-day roadshow, New York, Boston, Chicago, Denver, San Francisco, and schlepping around face-to-face meetings, and quite exhausting process. And a number of people have done that. Sean and I had the pleasure of doing one together back in 2005 or 2006, whenever it was. We took Spruce public in October last year, 3.5-day virtual roadshow with essentially the same outcome. Company got public. So very different experiences. So Sean, let's start with you. You're a public company. You've raised money recently. Just talk about how the sort of financing environment has changed in the time of COVID, and how you think this might continue.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Happy to comment. Almost a year ago, when we were wondering what was going to happen with this thing called COVID, we were actually preparing for our Q1 board meeting at CytomX, and it was on March 18th. And it was March 16th that the statewide stay-at-home order went into place. So that was our first virtual board meeting 2 days after the stay-at-home order. And around that time, pretty much every life science public company stock reached its bottom, including ours. And so, we were all, I think it's fair to say, collectively looking at that market reaction and watching CNBC in the morning and just thinking, where on earth is this going to go? And traditionally, with biotech being one of the most volatile asset classes, and Mike, you and I have sat around the table before in challenging public markets and thought, had to think about, what we used to call sort of nuclear winters for financing for companies. And that's where we thought we were going to be, quite honestly. I think that we'd be entering a protracted phase of limited capital availability for our industry. Turns out it couldn't be further from the truth in terms of what actually happened. And it really began in May, when things stabilized a little bit. And I think investors began to think that they needed to fund companies aggressively to get them through whatever was coming. And so there was a big spike in financing in the public market in May. Again, we all thought, well, this must be an anomaly. This isn't going to last. But astonishingly, it lasted. And, I think it's now 2020 and into January 2021, about $45 billion raised in the public market in IPOs and follow-ons. There's been a ton of follow-on activity. And no one could have seen that coming. So we decided to take advantage of that in January. We financed right after the JP Morgan conference. We raised just over 100 million. That was a one-day deal. I mean, we did a lot of prep before time, a lot of investor meetings late last year, but it was executed in one day, sitting in this office, away from the company virtually. And it was an amazing experience. So there's a lot more to talk about in terms of where the public market is, but those are just some initial observations.
So, Ciara, you've been busy raising money as well during these challenging times. Perhaps give a quick overview from a private company point of view.
Absolutely. I think, one of the differences between private and public companies, obviously, is the degree of information available to investors before they sit down and look you in the eye and back to square up the CEO. So we were right in the middle of a financing when the nuclear winter that we thought was coming started. And, we had some investors pause some potential new investors pause and decide whether they were comfortable moving forward given the ambiguity that was potentially hovering over all of us. And it was really nothing to do with our story or Amplyx. It really was about whether they needed to retain resources to sustain their portfolio. So I think a lot of people got conservative for a short period of time in terms of coming into new stories and making sure they had the wherewithal and the resources to support the companies they're already invested in. So we made the decision to wrap up our financing. And in that financing, we brought in new crossover investors. We brought in strategic investors and closed over $50 million right in the middle of everything before it had turned around. And I think that really just speaks to the quality of the investor syndicate we already had, the story, the team, and everything that you talked about, Mike, that makes for a good biotech investment.
Great, thanks, Ciara. So Niall, one thing that you admitted from your introduction was that you've also acted as CEO for one of the companies, and as a venture capitalist, you made a damn good CEO. And so you and I had the pleasure of raising a Series B for Reneo during the sort of middle and latter part of last year. But talk about it from the point of view of the investor, and you've raised a significant fund and busy investing that now. So experiences for on the investor perspective in this time where diligence and sitting down with people is much more obviously much more limited. How you navigated that?
Well, thanks, Mike. Damning with faint praise, VC makes good CEO. It's a low bar, I'm afraid, but yeah, it was a lot of fun and a really good growth and learning experience. I think on the investment side is, like many people in March and April, we sort of held our breath. How do we do our diligence? Normally we love to bring the companies in, have them present face to face, take them out for dinner. We have the in vino veritas, pour a glass of wine down their throat and see if there's a Jekyll and Hyde personality. There's a lot of in trying to interact with the entrepreneurs and the team and the people we're working with to try and get a read for their integrity. Can you work with them together? And we paused for a little bit and thought, how does this all work? And somehow or another, the momentum and the bounce back, as Sean alluded to in May, we just adapted, and all of a sudden we went from having the occasional use of video conferencing apps as being our least favorite format to like 19 apps at any one time. It's been interesting watching the evolution as we're 50 different platforms, and now it's basically Zoom and Microsoft Teams with the odd WebEx thrown in. It's been an interesting evolutionary process. But I was sort of wearing lots of hats. One was closing the Series B for Reneo, and there I was also investing from the RiverVest fund and doing the fundraising, and that was an interesting process. It actually went a little bit easier than we thought. And I think it was simply there was appetite for new and interesting stories, good teams, good clinical data. A lot of VCs have migrated quite early, which is an interesting but potentially dangerous place to be. It's always 2 years from clinical data or 2 years from actually getting into the clinic. The good news is nothing bad's probably going to happen for those 2 years, but the tricky part is, how are you moving the ball forward? It's very difficult to see that. So there was a rapid selection for the investors who stuck to their knitting, stayed on their core strategy, which was, investing in clinical stage assets or clinical programs. And those guys quickly, from my perspective, rose to the top and stepped up, and we had a oversubscribed fundraising at Reneo. On the venture capital side, it's been having raised, been involved in 3 prior RiverVest funds. It's like an IPO roadshow, only elongated over the course of a year and much more painful. There's absolutely no reason, there's no timeline, there's no incentive for anyone to come in early into your fund. So it's a long, prolonged process, partially driven, I think, by having a decent track record, but also by the ability to have a captive audience on Zoom. There was schlepping to Boston, New York, Chicago, even we did fundraising trips to London. That all compacted down and became a much more efficient process. And hopefully the next couple of weeks we'll be announcing we've hit our hard cap on our new fund. And what we're seeing is a couple of things: existing LPs re-upping, our existing investors wanted to get more cash to work. And that's been very gratifying to maintain those relationships, but also a lot of new LPs coming in. And I think this was, there was a class of investor out there who maybe had their fingers burned from 2006 to 2012 and had really shied away from life sciences. And the tricky part for them now is they've really missed one of the boom markets there's ever been in the last 7-8 years. So hopefully we'll be able to justify their newfound enthusiasm for life sciences. But from a mechanical perspective, it's never been easier. One did not have to spend a lot of money on dry cleaning your shirts and your jackets. It was very, very pleasant experience. One didn't have to rack up a massive carbon footprints on airlines. It was been very, very pleasant from that perspective. But what we're seeing is, and I think it's back to just a remarkable enthusiasm. You know, having been involved in biotech for a long time, if somebody said to me, you'd have the sequence of a viral genome in January, February, and you'd have an approved, albeit emergency authorized vaccine or 2 or 3 within 12 months, that's science fiction. That's Michael Crichton novels. That just doesn't happen in the real world. And you know, it's actually at the risk of getting soppy. I'm very, very proud of our industry that we, I think we justify our existence every day, but here's a really tangible, potent example. And I think the investors are reflecting that.
Thanks, Niall. And so I think that you know, moving on now to what I know from working with each of you, that you consider the most important component and most important factor for success, and that's having the right people. So probably a couple of things on this. One of the consequences of this tremendous availability of finance in biotech is everybody's hiring. And if you're in competitive environments like the Bay Area, as Sean is, or in San Diego, Ciara and Niall, you know, there's just a tremendous competition for talent. And so let's talk about that, and then also, you know, perhaps you, Ciara, just talk a little bit about, you know, the challenges of keeping teams engaged when everybody's working virtually, and you know, some of the benefits, but also some of the potential downsides of that.
Absolutely. I mean, I was not a fan prior. Yeah, maybe I'm still not a fan. I'm not sure. I was not a fan of the virtual model of company formation and execution, and that really stemmed from the experience where now Mike and I worked together on a company called Lumina, when we had the teeny tiniest office that was crammed full of people. You couldn't avoid anybody. And if you needed a decision made, you could get it done like that because everybody was just there. And that was so super efficient and fun. And we all liked to work together. So it just created this environment of enormous productivity and pride in what we were doing and how we were doing it. So that's what I personally aimed to recreate at Amplyx. And it's the polar opposite of doing everything from home on Zoom. You know, what I saw at Amplyx is there were some people that absolutely just were like a fish to water, loved it, was a better solution for them. And then there were people on the opposite side of the spectrum who hated not having that separation of church and state. You know, work is work, home is home, and we worked through that. So, you know, I think the structured meetings, the planned team meetings, the vendor management meetings, all of those work just as well, if not perhaps a tad better in the virtual environment, because I think you're more focused, there's less of that, you know, chit-chat banter, but there's less of the chit-chat banter, which is what people often enjoy about the people that you work with. So I feel like the biggest, there are 2 downsides to this model, which is why I hope we can move away from it, and at least in part, in the not too distant future, is you don't have the sort of social interaction. And we can talk in a moment about how we've tried to recreate that in this format. But I worry most about the unplanned conversations, the brainstorming sessions, the opportunistic chats at the coffee maker that don't happen, and that I have yet to come up with an idea to replicate those. Teams does a nice job of being able to sort of know where people are and whether they're available. but it's just not the same. So, you know, we've done virtual wine tastings, games, quizzes. We even did a virtual painting session, which was really fun, actually. Everybody got shipped a canvas and we had somebody guide us through a painting. And you know, so everybody has their own individual version of this one piece, one image. And there's lots of different ways you can do that. But every single one of us wants to get back together in person and have those, you know, three-dimensional interactions as opposed to this two-dimensional format that we're sort of stuck in.
So Sean, as is evident from your virtual background there, you actually have wet labs in your company, and so talk a little bit about that, and then talk about hiring in the Bay Area and finding the talent, because I know with two companies up there, it's just how competitive it is, and getting the right people is a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's brutally competitive at the moment, and you have to take every opportunity to think creatively about how to recruit and retain talent. It's a key issue. So the structure of our company, we have about 160 employees, about 50 are in research in the labs, and actually, thankfully, they've been able to continue to be highly productive during COVID. They have 76,000 square feet of space all to themselves, while the rest of us are working from home, and it's actually worked pretty well. They've really been doing a great job, but the retention and the war for talent, that's what we're in, is very real, and I don't see it getting any easier anytime soon, for a few reasons. So I mean, although yes, biotech goes through boom and bust cycles, as we discussed earlier, and tech as well, this one looks a little bit different. And one of the reasons I think it's different, maybe different, is that science has progressed so rapidly over the last decade, and as Niall quite rightly pointed out, with the progress with vaccines, RNA-based vaccines for COVID developed and brought to patients' arms in less than a year. It is science fiction, and this is happening in many different areas of science, whether it's gene therapy, systems biology, AI, cell therapy, you name it. There is unbelievable innovation in science. And so I actually think our industry, the life science industry, has unlimited potential to grow from where we are today. I see this last year as being utterly transformative for our industry. So where are the people going to come from to run this industry? Well, how about the Rady School? So let's talk about that for a second, because going back to the experience that Ciara, Niall, and I had at Rady, which was, again, we've all said, transformational for us. The school, did at that time when it was founded, and continues to emphasize innovation, and at that time, innovation in the life sciences, and we just have to keep training people for whether it's being able to work in the lab behind me, virtually behind me, or in the business of science, and where that all comes together, and in leadership and creativity, because I just really think there are unimaginable opportunities to tie this all together in the future. So in the meantime, we're going to have to keep slogging it out day by day, position by position, just building our cultures in our companies and attracting people who are aligned with our vision, our mission, our values, and really want to be with us for the long run. But it is tough. There's no question about it.
So now, what are your thoughts? I know that you, Ciara, and I, with contributions from some of our colleagues like Alex and others, standing around the whiteboard and really sort of hashing out plans has been a sort of key part of our sort of modus operandi that hasn't been quite as available in a virtual environment. What are your thoughts, and what are your thoughts about what changes when we do get back to the opportunity to work in person later this year?
So it's the interesting aspect. I think we've been fortunate, or at least I think everyone here, we've already sort of set the standards, the culture, the way the company operates, and then COVID came along. So the bedrock, the bones were already there, the foundation was already set. And I think that's a testament to everyone on the call, and that albeit differently, that culture was maintained and possibly even strengthened in some ways. There's been greater efficiency. people, no one misses meetings anymore because they're sitting at home with nothing else to do. So from that perspective, it's been great. The one, the joys of being a venture capitalist is that you have paranoid fears and you get to voice them regularly, unlike an entrepreneur who has paranoid fears and gets to bottle them up or solve the problems. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is if I was building a team today with people maybe I didn't know so well, establishing that water cooler environment, the whiteboarding environment, how do you do that? And then say you do have a successful team built in this virtual Zoom universe, and then you transition to in-face and you realize you don't like the people in person. I mean, this is the sort of things that keep me up at night. I think we'll be okay. I think a lot of the people we hire, it's kind of unusual we're hiring virtual unknowns. There's always referrals or people that we know they work together well in a team format. We're not after if we are after rock stars, they better be able to be team players at the same time and submerge that ego. So I think that's the key selection pressure. Yeah, so moving forward, that's my only remaining question is as hopefully towards the tail end of this year, we'll get back to quote unquote normal. I think the things that we can dispense with are a lot of the face-to-face pitches, the bake-offs or vendors, all that kind of nonsense, which quite frankly was starting to die out anyway. The unnecessary face-to-face meetings, the travel will probably decrease and it'll become a little bit more focused. And I think that's probably a good thing for all our sanity's health and probably for the planet and the environment as well. But the key things that I miss, you hit the nail on the head, Mike, is there's something magic that happens in the first 90 to 100 days of building a company with the whiteboard, the passing of the pen, the ideas. You photograph the whiteboard, you think about it, you ruminate, and plans get made. And that, I haven't found a way to replicate that virtually or by Zoom or by Teams. Hasn't become a critical problem yet, and hopefully we'll all be sufficiently well vaccinated and covered so that when we do need to get back into that mode of thinking, the creative, the forming, storming, forming, norming. You know, a lot of our companies are already in the norming stage, so the shock of COVID wasn't too bad. It's the storming, forming bit that I'm a little bit concerned about, how you establish that in this time. Because a lot of, we're social animals, we're social mammals, and a lot of that's just body language, physical interaction, how people interact with their tone of voice, unusual cycling wear being worn in the office, quirks of people that endear you to them. But that's my only concern, but hopefully we will sidestep that concern and get back to a relative level of normality in the next 6 months or so.
Just one other quick thing on one positive of virtual working in terms of hiring and recruitment is that, of course, the talent pool has expanded because now we can hire from anywhere. So, we've definitely taken a view of, well, I mean, a bit like Ciara shared. I mean, my kind of view going into COVID was we have to get back together as fast as possible.
Yeah.
But I've done a big U-turn on that, and we're hiring at least non-lab people really from anywhere.
It's interesting. So anecdotally, I've talked to a few friends at large pharma companies. I don't know if this is a policy across the board, but a lot of them would say you can only hire 12 people this year because the building capacity and the parking space and the infrastructure, we've only got 12 slots for you. And come April of 2020, those rules were torn up. And one of my old bosses at Johnson & Johnson hired 40 people because the people can be anywhere. And there was not the same, how should we say, facilities requirements for that because they're at home, which is a good short-term. People are getting trained. There's a lot of learnings for those folks, but it will be interesting, Sean, to see what happens when we return back to normal and all those 40 new hires. There's no parking spaces for them, which will be interesting conundrum.
And I think the other thing is when you're hiring in a virtual environment and you're bringing in folks that aren't already sort of integrated and connected to some portion of your team, you have to be much more deliberate about onboarding. You have to be much more structured. It can't be, oh, just go and talk to everybody. You have to have a really detailed plan that makes sure that they know who to talk to about anything, who's doing what. Really, I think you just have to take that up a level in planning and integrating and onboarding new folks so that they can be successful.
Right. So let's change focus. I think we could also spend a lot more time talking about the people part of the equation, but let's move on to sort of innovation and like, I'm going to start with infectious disease, because one thing the pandemic reminds us is just how important it is to continue to innovate in infectious disease. And unfortunately, it's an area that has been tremendously neglected. Big pharma abandoned the antibiotic space, and we've seen lots of different discussions before a virus really had a dramatic impact about the rise of superbugs, the resistant to existing antibiotics. I think it's estimated that something like 700,000 lives are lost each year to superbugs. There's forecasts that by 2050, antimicrobial resistance could lead to as many as 10 million deaths because we just don't have the tools to fight that. The head of the director of the Wellcome Trust said systemic market failure has left antibiotic innovation starved of financing, meaning potentially life-saving products unable to make it to patients who need them. And we're really seeing that innovation in the antibiotic antimicrobial space has been left to smaller companies like Amplyx. The challenges are not trivial. So Ciara, a few words on that. I want to make sure that we leave some time for some questions at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there was a seismic shift in the capital market approach to financing infectious disease companies, and it happened quickly. So when we first financed Amplyx in 2015, Achaeogem was a $1.1 billion company. 2 years ago, their assets were auctioned off for tens of millions of dollars. And they committed the awful sin of doing phase 3 studies and getting a drug approved. The things that we all hope to do, right? So, I think that there is a broken system. There is a lack of appreciation for the amount of time it can take to identify a new target and do all of the work. I mean, I think that in some ways, COVID has helped because it's put a spotlight back on what a devastating, out of control pathogen can do to the world and the world economy. But at the same time, I think there will not be novel antibiotics ready for EAU approval in a year. There just won't be, because the basic research to get a new target is so different to developing a vaccine. And I think that the innovation is in the hands of small companies, and the governments of the world need to think about antimicrobial resistance the way they've just been thinking about COVID. And that is, it's not a nice to have, it's a need to have. It's the foundation of every medical practice that occurs. So routine surgeries will become life-threatening. Childbirth will become life-threatening again if we do not have effective antibiotics and antifungal agents. And I think that there's a lot of work ongoing to that. Hopefully people will really sit up and listen post-COVID and do things like pass the Disarm Act to reform reimbursement, pass Pasteur to really incentivize people to develop drugs that may or may not get used. The entire model is broken. I mean, I've sat in front of clinical infectious disease pharmacists to say, I want multiple new mechanism antibiotics sitting on my shelf, but I'm not going to use them because I want to make sure that we don't develop resistance. So who's going to do that? Nobody's going to do that. It just needs to have a different approach. And we've done it for other things. We've done it for anthrax and other sorts of defense type threats. And this is a real threat that, as Mike said, is costing the world about 1 million lives a year, and that is only going up at a very alarming rate. And when we've seen the sort of combination of COVID and multi-drug resistant fungal Candida auris in wards, it's devastating. You know, you have patients who are struggling to deal with their viral infection, who are losing their battle because of a secondary infection, be that fungal or bacterial. And, you know, we're just going to see more and more of the challenges that really it does need to be addressed, and it needs to happen now. So call your congressman and tell them that you support disarm.
Along those lines, Ciara, I mean, when you talk about congressmen and policy, right? I mean, this is an area where public, private, you know, and partnerships and global policy is going to need to shift, and hopefully that will, now that the US is back in the WHO, right? Things start to move in the right direction. But I want to actually talk a little bit about coronaviruses and a somewhat similar situation way back when Mike and I used to work together at Structural Genomics in San Diego, where when SARS-CoV-1 emerged, and we were a protein crystallography company, and we actually were the first company to solve the structure of that protease, and we put it into the protein data bank. And why was that potentially useful? Well, because structure-based drug design could potentially be used to make drugs against SARS-CoV-1. Well, no one did that because the virus kind of, you know, fortunately at that time dissipated, and everyone just kind of forgot about it. But Stephen Burley, our scientific officer at the time, wrote a piece in an opinion piece in Nature, I think it was last April or May, saying that, you know, because then the structure of SARS-CoV-2 came out in 21 days. Last year, solved by a Chinese group, and I'm sure many companies around the world are trying to do that drug discovery. But Stephen's point was that was a real lost opportunity. So you know, how can we do that differently this time, and where does the financing come from? I agree, this is an area where it probably isn't going to come from the conventional sources of VC and public market. It has to be something more creative. That's going to take an unbelievable amount of leadership.
Mm-hmm. It is. I mean, the reason that we have vaccines and drugs to treat coronavirus is because of the massive infusion of billions of dollars from government sources. I mean, that's a huge part of why this has happened so quickly. So if we want a solution to antimicrobial resistance, we already know what it is, and the model's there. It just has to be applied to this problem.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just to echo that, I mean, I think what politicians and the public are very, very good at is dealing with acute, immediate crises. You know, a forest fire, something very abrupt and acute. What we're not very good at is the proverbial, you know, frog in the boiling water situation, where the temperature just gets turned up year by year, and you've got a cooked frog by the end of it. And what we're seeing with that antibiotic resistance, antifungal resistance is it's the frog in the water. And the tricky part there is by the time the frog realize that we've lost a decade or two, and it's going to be very, very difficult to catch that up. The roadmap is there. I think none of us would be asking for handouts. I mean, research grants and all very, very are good and everything, but it's actually difficult to administer and maybe not essential. I think what we've seen as the role model is guaranteed pre-ordering, bulk buying. If you get this antibiotic approved, we will guarantee we'll buy 1 million doses for the next 5 years. And then all of a sudden, you can sort of see a route to actually making a return on that investment. And that antibiotic or antifungal maybe gets pre-approved. And it's going to require governmental decision to do that, or we will wake up in 2025, 2026, and that tooth abscess or that routine abdominal appendectomy will kill you, like it used to do to our grandparents' generation. I have a great aunt who died from tuberculosis. George Orwell died from tuberculosis. Now we don't think about it anymore. TB resistance is coming, especially in Eastern Europe. But by the time we figure that out, the pipeline's empty.
Mm-hmm. And the expertise is lost. The expertise that really...
Yeah, absolutely. There's an entire generation of really strong antimicrobial, antifungal drug developers who are dying off, for want of a better phrase, or have been repurposed into other areas. And it's a shame, but until there's international or governmental interest in guaranteeing some sort of return to the entrepreneurs, to the investors who stand those companies up, it's a very, very tough space right now.
Agreed.
We've got a number of questions. I want to weave some of these questions in. I also want to just find time to address another part of what I know each of you are, sort of critical component of what we do, and that's really the focus on the patient and how important that is. And just thinking about that. But let me introduce one of the questions that's come in, that COVID has set a new benchmark for speed in innovation and introduction to the market. Is this the beginning of a new trend or an anomaly brought on by the pandemic?
Hopefully both. I mean, I think that one of the biggest shifts, or maybe a couple of biggest shifts, one, regulatory flexibility on what's an appropriate data set. And that's been an evolving trend. We've seen it in rare disease, we've seen it in high unmet need cancer, but we haven't seen it in every area where it really should apply. But I also think the public appreciation for what it takes to get these things done and being willing to participate in clinical trials has clearly gone way up. I mean, I know tons of people have participated in the vaccine trials. And, I think that's a key part of what needs to change for things to happen faster. Every single one of us probably spend the most time and attention on enrollment into our studies, because that's almost always the rate limiter. So if those changes stick, then I think that we will see a more rapid drug development pipeline for most, not all indications.
Yeah. I mean, I think, look, 18 months ago, I'm as guilty as any. Most investors, their idea of vaccine development and RNAi vaccines was like, oh man, that's a tough space to go down. You don't get rewarded. The vaccine pricing is notoriously difficult. The clinical trials are very, very tough to run, because you're taking a normally healthy person, giving them an intervention to prevent something else happening. It's a very, very difficult space to be in. And so the silver lining to this particularly dark cloud is the validation of RNAi platforms, the ability, I mean, I haven't went back and checked, but I think, Moderna wasn't a success story this time, 18 months ago. The Pfizer deal with Biotech didn't really cause any ripples in the market. It was like, that's weird. Why is Pfizer doing that? And in some respects, this COVID situation has actually helped accelerate and validate that technology probably a decade quicker than it would have done. And just cheered reading this morning that in the next couple of months, Moderna and Pfizer will be rolling out strain boosters for the COVID. This is incredible. So I'm cautiously optimistic that it isn't, as Ciara said, it's an anomaly and hopefully the new norm as well. I don't think things will be quite as accelerated. We may not have, as touch wood, as many critical events as we're seeing right now. But people, the grim truth of it is, if people had have worn face masks and socially distanced, with the death tolls in most of the developing world would have been, 20% of what they are. We're always looking for that white knight to roll in the vaccine, but there's a lot we can do ourselves to prevent vaccine infections. And just for example, I think I read there were 600,000 swab tests done in the UK in January and February, and not a single one came back for influenza. Well, there's a roadmap for preventing infectious diseases, which at least in the UK kill 20 to 30,000 people a year, the flu, just as a normal course of business. So there's a lot of things we can do whilst we wait for the cavalry to ride in and rescue us with a vaccine. So I'm cautiously optimistic. It's a little bit of the pharma industry model being validated, the new technology has been validated, but hopefully at least among a good chunk of the population, a realization there's actually a lot you can do for yourself, as well.
So Sean, the cancer area has been probably the most dynamic therapeutic area in terms of speed to approval and the and the like. So how do you see things evolving there, if at all?
Yeah, a few ways. First of all, we're an antibody therapeutics company, so we make, we scale up antibodies in, GMP facilities that get material to do our trials. And the process of going from DNA to drug in vial was accelerated in an extraordinary way by Regeneron and Lilly to get the therapeutic antibodies, the anti-COVID antibodies, to the market under emergency use authorization. And, so that's probably going to result in a sustainable acceleration, I would say, of timelines of getting biologics to patients. It's hard to do it quite that fast, as a matter of routine, but it's caused everybody in the industry to ask questions. Okay, it's caused every CEO to ask questions of their teams. Can we do it that fast? And yeah, I kind of call it. It's a little bit like it's a bit similar to the Zoom effect, right? So if you'd asked us probably on this exact day last year, do you think you could run your company by Zoom? Do you think you could hold a board meeting by Zoom? Do you think blah blah blah? We would have said no, probably not. Well, you know what? We can, and that's fundamentally shifted. We'll come back to a hybrid. I think timelines of getting drugs to to patients, I think, are going to be faster, because we now know places where we can take a bit more risk, and that balance between innovation and regulation is really the key. That's where you can save time in terms of when you release batches and so on and so forth. In terms of drug approvals, I think we've seen a pretty consistent trend over the last several years of FDA being a lot more open and collaborative pre-COVID to strong data packages that rely on innovative endpoints and creative endpoints when you have a drug that works. So I think this is the really exciting thing. If you have a drug that works, whether it's in oncology or any therapeutic area, there's increasing flexibility. I mean, particularly in oncology and rare disease, I would say there's flexibility at the agency and agencies around the world to look at that data and say, well, we'll work with you, we'll collaborate with you. And then there are patient advocacy groups, which are more and more influential, again, particularly in oncology and rare disease. So I do think that with a patient-focused mindset, one can definitely move things faster.
So we'll take another question here from Jason Shelf. With the growth of digital collaboration, remote communication paired with the great migration occurring, how do you see the biotech life science innovation ecosystems changing? It's very much a Boston, San Francisco, San Diego sort of world. What does the future look like? Perhaps start with you now.
The tricky part is those areas are extremely sticky, but we're already starting to see certainly in the tech side a migration to other states within the US of venture capitalists and startups. And I think it's probably just simply accelerating a long-term trend, which is there are centers of innovation. Think Detroit back in the 1920s, 1930s. Pretty much all the cars in the world were made there. And it took, you zoom forward 40, 50 years, and that's not the case anymore. Cars are manufactured more commonly in Tennessee or Alabama right now. So I think what we're having is probably just an acceleration, longer term trends that maybe would have played out over a couple of decades, which would have been a gradual sort of trickle down, people maybe having an exit or two under their belt going, this Bay Area is quite expensive. I'd like a garden. I wouldn't mind going somewhere with lower taxes and things like that. And so, and then with the slow rollout of Zoom and teleconferencing, it would have sort of happened organically. I think what we're happening right now is probably just, rather than that, as I say, playing out over a decade or two, it's just happening a lot quicker. And it's a good thing. I think dissemination of talent and people to other parts of the US and other parts of the world is got to be a good thing. I can see, rather than it being a slow sort of momentum with a lot of inertia counteracting that, it seems to have happened all at once. And the first couple of companies or the first couple of people who are successful in the next couple of years in a non-traditional geography, that'll just accelerate the process.
So just conscious of the fact we're coming towards the top of the hour, I want to give you each the opportunity to give us sort of quick thoughts on the future of innovation was part of the title. So maybe start with you, Sean, and go to Ciara and then Niall, and then we'll hand it over to Monique to wrap up here.
Yeah, I'm just incredibly optimistic. I think there's going to be, I mean, over the two and a half decades that some of us have been in this this business, and actually maybe thinking specifically about oncology for just a moment. Since I was in the lab in Oxford doing my PhD, trying to unravel some basic cell signaling pathways, from there to today, our understanding of biology has accelerated exponentially, and that exponential change is going to increase. So you could think of it as kind of a Moore's law, for biology. But the more biology we understand, the more we're going to be able to intervene and understand disease and treat it. And the surgical precision with which Moderna and Pfizer and others have been able to knock out the virus, we're going to start to see that. I'm not 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. We'll start to see that in many different diseases with a whole range of different technologies. So like I mentioned earlier on, systems biology and AI, and trying to really understand and map cells, cell atlas projects coming out of MIT. This is going to change things, and we're not going to be doing drug discovery in the dark anymore, where we're sort of peering into the cell trying to think what's really going on. We're actually going to know, and that's going to change everything. That's why I'm just incredibly optimistic about where life sciences is going. It'll be bumpy, it'll be ups and downs, and we'll have nuclear winters again, but and we're going to need people. We need people to be trained. We need creative, multidisciplinary thinkers, and I don't think it's going to really matter too much unless you're a physical worker in the lab. I don't think it's going to matter that much actually where you are, to be honest. So I'm really excited.
Ciara?
Yeah, well, I think that there's been one of the other shifts that I think this whole COVID world has accelerated is there's been a shift towards tackling the really hard problems. So things that you couldn't even imagine addressing 10, 20 years ago by virtue of gene therapy, cell therapy. I think that as a scientific community, we now have so many more tools to really tackle the hardest diseases and the hard questions. And I mean, I think that the world of Me Too drug development is dead, and all of that energy and and resources can be put to making transformative medications for patients, and really doing things that really move the needle. And you mentioned earlier about patients, and that's all. It's what has this the potential to do for any given patient has always been the central question for me. And if it's not something huge, then is it really worth the investment of time and effort and energy? Because all of what we're doing is really hard, but doing it and having a great outcome, if it works, is I think becoming the standard.
Niall, right, 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, I think just in some senses, the market in the US is going to take care of that. Prescription benefit managers are not going to reward you for slightly betters or slightly different. They're going from twice a day to once a day dosing. And it takes a little bit of time, but there's probably going to be a correction and a much more emphasis on truly life-changing therapies. And, I welcome that.
So Ciara, Sean, Niall, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. And Monique, over to you.
Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and guide these fascinating experiences, and for giving our talented alumni the platform to thrive. Ciara, Niall, and Sean, we're so proud and grateful to have you as alumni and Rady ambassadors. The Ordóñez, Rady students, alumni, faculty, staff, and friends, thank you for joining us this morning. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you all.